Hello, this is Dan Grease from flashandmath.com, and today I'd like to talk to you about one of the new features in Flash CS5 and one creative use for that feature. Let me show you a Flash movie here. It opens up with a couple of display objects on the stage, and they look something like folded up pieces of paper. And if you click on them, then they open up to reveal some text. Now I've created a text accordion class to create these. There are two instances of this text accordion class on the stage presently. The text being used here is HTML formatted text, and you can see that this one over here actually has an active link. And the opening and closing of these text accordions is controlled by a tween. And it's really a nice and smooth and bouncy tween. I'm not sure if the video settings that I'm using are allowing you to see that. But if you check out the demo online, I think you'll see that it really is a nice and smooth and cute little effect here. Now, the new feature in Flash CS5, which makes these easier to create, is the concept of linked text fields. Now, you may have already heard something about linked text fields. You may have seen a demo on them. Probably in terms of drawing them on the stage in the Flash IDE. But what we're doing here is we're actually creating these linked text fields using ActionScript. And the idea here is that the text here is one complete body of text, but it's being split up and put onto individual sprites. Each individual slat here of the text accordion is an individual sprite, and they're all being animated independently of each other. But the text is being broken up into individual lines and placed onto those sprites. So let me explain to you what linked text fields are. I will draw them here on the stage, but I will be showing you how to do it also in terms of ActionScript. So I have some text. I'm going to paste it into this text field that I've just created. And you can see that what has happened is that I have a little bit too much text to fit inside of this text container. So this little red box has appeared here, and if you click on that, then if you draw another text field, then this new text field will be linked to the previous text field, and the text which did not fit on the first text field will now spill over onto this second one. And you can see that still I have too much text to fit inside of there, so I can click on there and create a new text field, a new container for text, and now all the text fits on here together. And what's nice about these text containers is that you can reshape them, and the text will be recomposed accordingly, and they are, can be moved around independently of each other, but the text really remains one complete body of text. So how do we do this using ActionScript instead of just drawing on the stage? Now I found that the best way to explain this is with a little Flash movie. This Flash movie is based on a diagram which is right there in the documentation for Flash CS5, but I think it helps to have someone kind of talk you through it a little bit here. So what we have here are a couple of sprites on the stage, and those are the sprites that we want to contain our text. We might have 2 or 3 or several. In our text accordion example, we have each individual line of text being placed on an individual sprite. So meanwhile, we have our text. Now the text that we have here is going to be stored as a text flow object. And think of a text flow object as simply your abstract representation of the text in terms of the characters that it should contain and how the text is broken up into paragraphs and other types of divisions. Now creating a text flow object is done with the constructor. New text flow is being done here. And getting the text onto that text flow can be done in more than one way, but one way to do that is using the import to flow method of the text converter class, which takes a string as an input, and you can see here we're specifying that we're going to be using HTML formatted an HTML formatted string. It takes a string as an input and creates a text flow object out of that string. So now we have our text onto the text flow object, and we want to get it onto these sprites. Well, we need a couple of things to do that. First of all, each individual sprite that we want to contain text has to have an associated container controller object, which basically manages the text which will be placed onto that sprite. A container controller is created with the constructor, and you see here we're specifying the name of the sprite. You can say, for example, that one of these sprites is called this container. And we also tell it the width and the height of the text that it should contain. So we've created our container controllers for our sprites. We need another class to use here, and that is a flow composer. Now, the iFlow composer interface is what we're talking about here, but the specific implementation of that interface that we will be using is the standard flow composer. Now, a text flow object has a flow composer as a variable, and you can see that we are going to set a new standard flow composer to be that flow composer. Now, what the flow composer needs to know, of course, is the container controllers that it should be using to distribute text. And the way we do that is with the add controller method of the flow composer class. And the order in which we call these add controller methods will determine how the text is distributed over these sprites. And that's basically the setup there. The only thing left to do is to get this text onto these sprites, and that is done with a simple call to the update all controllers method of the flow composer object associated to our text flow. And once that is done, individual lines of text will now be placed onto these sprites as display object children for those sprites. And that's basically it. Now, let's take a look at how this code is actually being used in our text accordion class. Now, I don't want to go into all of this code in great detail. Instead, we will make this code available to you at flashandmath.com, and you can check out all the detail later on. Instead, I would just like to take a look a little bit at how those classes that I mentioned are being used here. Now, the constructor for the text accordion doesn't really do much. It's just setting some default values. The real work of the class is done in the import text method of this class, which basically takes a string as an input, and then this method does the work of creating the container sprites and putting the text onto those container sprites. You can see that we're using the import to flow method of the text converter class to create our text flow, and you can see that I've also allowed for different types of text to be used here, either HTML formatted or the new text layout format, or even plain text can be used here. Things like font size and line height, those are attributes of the text flow object, and those are set here. And if we move down here a little bit further, you can see that we're starting to create the containers to hold our text. Right here I just created a simple sprite. All right. They are positioned and drawn. I'm not going to show you the code for that. There are some other objects here that you don't need to be concerned with at the moment. And if we move down here a little bit further, you can see that we're creating a container controller to go with the new container that we just created. And having created the container controller, we are also going to add that controller to our flow composer for our text flow object. And after having done that, we call the update all controllers method for the flow composer object, and that will attempt to take our text and put it onto the sprites that we've just created. But you can see that what I'm doing here is that I'm using a do while loop so that we have just the right number of sprites to contain our text. And the way that's done is this. Every time the update controllers method is called, the text is put onto these container sprites. But what can happen is that there may be more actual lines of text than will fit onto our container sprites. And if that is indeed the case, then this do while loop is repeated. We create another container. another container controller object to be associated with that container. We add that controller to our flow composer, and then we recompose the text with the update all controllers method for the flow composer. And that will repeat until we have just the right number of sprites to contain our text. And that's about it as far as the new CS5 code goes. The other code involved here is using a tween to open and close our text accordions. And I should say that we're using a clever little trick devised by Barbara Kaskosh of Flashandmath, where we use one object with one variable, and that one variable is being tweened, and the value of that variable controls all the motion of our individual sprites. But that's a lot of detail that I'll let you check out when you download the source code from Flashandmath, and I hope that you'll enjoy the effect and maybe even find a use for these little text accordions. And I thank you very much for listening.